So any second now, and we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to the Take a Stand live event. And remember, taking a stand is not about necessarily taking a stand against the world and everybody else. It's about taking a stand for yourself. Taking a stand for yourself, dealing with things. We always say it's an inside-out job when it comes to trauma recovery and healing. So taking a stand is really about putting yourself first. So I'm going to have a conversation with Cindy, and she's going to share a story of triumph over trauma with us. Now, as you're listening to Cindy's story and we're having the conversation, sometimes we do go deep, and it can be quite difficult for people to hear. So please make sure that you get the emotional support it is that you need. Either reach out to Cindy, her details will be below the video, or close friends, your doctor, or if you feel like you're spiraling out of control, head straight down to your local hospital and have a conversation. It's all part of the trauma recovery and healing journey. We've all been there. There's no shame in it. And I just want you to know that if things bubble up to the surface, it's okay. It's absolutely perfectly natural, and you're going to be okay. So I'm just going to do the YouTube thing as you do. If you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. This channel is all about living life trauma-free. Click that little notification bell and give us a thumbs up. And please, if you can think of anybody who you think this would help, please pass this video on, because you never know. Someone can hear the right thing and it can really help them through a difficult time. So welcome, Cindy. It's lovely to be connected and talking to you again. It's been way too long.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a long time, but my pleasure to be here. Super excited to share with people because I don't believe recovering from trauma is a one and done thing. Sometimes things can sneak up eons of years later, but it doesn't come until you're ready to face it.
Yes, that is very, very true. Absolutely. And sometimes it's when you least expect it.
Oh, yeah.
And I also know that you've recently published a book.
I did. Let me grab it.
Yay. Great.
It's Overcoming Dark Family Secrets.
Yep.
My journey from worthless to worthy.
Yep, nice.
And it's available on Amazon.
Fabulous.
Yes. So you want to ask me questions, or you want me just to get started?
Well, I guess the question is, and it is about your story, something that you can share, which is a triumph over trauma, to give listeners a little bit of a flavor.
Well, the short version, per se, definitely was not raised in a Leave It to Beaver home. My father was sexually, physically, and mentally abusive. And I was also sexually abused by two family friends. At 18, I got married to a man much like my father, minus the sexual abuse. And it wasn't until I was 35 years old that anybody told me my life was my choice. The way that I was raised, keeping secrets, especially my father would always tell me if my mother ever found out about the sexual abuse, it would kill her. So this was our deep, dark family secret. Nobody was ever going to tell my mother. So all of us kids always rallied around, like, we all knew what was happening. Well, the younger four all knew what was happening, but the oldest didn't know about the sexual abuse until years later. But it wasn't fun growing up. Now, I was very fortunate that I got more of my mother's love. I was the baby of the family, and therefore I think she just had more time with me. And so that was my saving grace. My mother always told me, don't ever depend upon a man to support you. And she always told me that I was meant for great things. And, she just always encouraged me, sharing stories with me to help me with my mindset. It took me years to realize that she was a victim as well. I mean, growing up, I knew my dad beat us. I knew, that we were sexually abused, and I didn't believe in mental abuse. even when I was told that my life was my choice, mental abuse started being a big keyword. And I would go, that's bullshit. There's no such thing as mental abuse. And I worked in social services, so I was hearing those words a lot, mental abuse. And I'm like, no way, it just doesn't exist. But after my mother died, and my mother had to die for me in order for me to heal and even begin my healing journey. So after she died, my marriage was in shambles, and my daughter was involved in gangs. My ex-husband was involved with another woman. I had so many deaths in my family. My mother, my father, my grandmother, my brother-in-law got murdered. I had my husband's grandmother died. It just was like so many deaths. And then my daughter being involved in gangs, I felt very alone, very desperate. I was very suicidal. And matter of fact, just before I met who I call my mentor, my first coach, I had planned on killing myself. My ex-husband, I was still with him. He had a 2-week business trip that he was going on. So I asked my sister and I had went to the doctor, and the doctor, he was stupid. He was so stupid. He knew that I was upset, and so he got me to break down and start crying. And so he walked out of the room, and I remember saying, if I could only sleep, I'd feel better, because I couldn't sleep. I mean, I would try to sleep, but just so much was going on in my life. I was so depressed, so sad, and I just couldn't sleep. So he comes back and gives me a prescription for 100 sleeping pills. This is why I say he was a stupid doctor. He knew I was depressed, and he gives me a prescription for 100 sleeping pills. So when Earl was going out of town, I asked my sister-in-law to watch my kids. I go, will you pick up the kids Friday after school, and I'll pick them up Monday after work? Because I figured if I went home Friday night and took the pills, nobody would even look for me until Monday night. So this was my plan. So I went, so after work, I went to a liquor store, bought some vodka and orange juice, came home, poured the vodka and orange juice, set the sleeping pills next to it, and my bra was bugging me. I hate bras. And I thought, I want to die comfortable. So I went in my bedroom to put my pajamas on. And as I was coming out of my bedroom with my jammies on, there's a knock at my door. And it's this lady that just started working where I worked. And she says, oh, I was just driving by, and I thought that I would stop by. And I said, okay. So she came in. She had to have seen the pills and the drink, but she never mentioned them. She stayed at my house till 2:00 in the morning. And by the time she left, I did not want to kill myself anymore. It was like whatever I was feeling had passed. So Monday I go to work, and I go, where's Mary? And everybody's like, there's no Mary that works here. And I'm like, yes, there is. She started working here last week. My best friend, Liz is like, Cindy, there's no Mary that works here. I was going, Liz, we had lunch with her last week. And Liz is like, Cindy, we never had lunch with anybody but each other last week. There is no Mary that works here. So I'm like, I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. Everybody's like telling me, and I knew that I had lunch with this lady, and I knew she came to my house. So finally Liz goes, Cindy, why are you so adamant to find this Mary person? And I told her the story. I go, hey, Liz, my very best friend, didn't even realize I was that close to killing myself. And she's like, Cindy, she goes, think about it for just a moment. Nobody but nobody ever just happens to drive by your house. You live on a dirt road 2 miles off of the main road. It's like nobody just happens by your house. And she said, and anyways, how would have she known where you lived? So I concluded it was divine intervention. I was not meant to kill myself. It was divine intervention. A couple months after that, I got a new job with my new boss, and she's the one that told me my life was my choice. And I was like, lady, you're crazy. Nobody in their right mind is going to choose my life. Nobody, right? But she bought Tony Robbins tapes for me, Tony Robbins affirmations and Tony Robbins talks. And she got me books to read on self-improvement and different things. And Earl, he was always threatening to leave me and the kids penniless. Now, Earl was making about 80K a year, and I was making 10K a year. My kids were used to his income. And I was like, how am I going to raise two teenagers, right, on his income, on my income? So I was like, that always scared me, was like not having that money. But Carol kept telling me, hey, what would you do if Earl really left you penniless? Who would fix your car? Where would you live? What would you do? And it really got me visualizing and thinking about how life could be. And it took me a while, but I did eventually gain the courage to leave Earl. And one of the things that I did while I was in this, because I'm still like very tormented over my own past. I felt like I killed my mother. I felt like I killed my father. Logically, I knew I didn't, but I thought that I did because I thought my thoughts, because my mother did find out about the sexual abuse a day before she died of a massive heart attack. So that's why I thought that I killed her. And it was a very, I couldn't have felt more guilty had I actually pulled the trigger and shot her. And then at her funeral, I was wishing my father was dead. So then when he got a brain tumor, I thought that I caused it, because I'm also powerful. Crazy thoughts that we have in our heads. Yeah. But, and even though, my whole life, it was like I had lied about my father. I had to act like he was a good father. I had to pretend like he was a good father, even though he was doing horrendous things. So while I was with Liz, what I did a lot is I would tell her who my perfect man was. All of the traits. He had a good sense of humor. He wasn't a black or white thinker. He was intelligent. He carried on good conversations. He was interested in numerous things and just all kinds of things about his personality. 6 months after I left Earl, I met Mike. Mike is my current husband. I met him on one of the first dating websites, back when internet dating was not cool in 1997. And so anyway, I was shocked the more I got to know him that he had all these qualities that I had talked about to Liz for a long time. And we had been dating for a few months. He was at my house, and Brian, my son, had the football team at the house. So Mike and I went to a little park just to talk and get away from the kids. And during this time, we went to a fast food place and got some 32-ounce sodas. So we're sitting at the park drinking these sodas in his truck, and I spilled my soda all over his truck, like just all over the whole thing. So Mike jumps out of the truck because he had some rags in the back, and he starts cleaning it up. And most of the soda went on the driver's side. I curled up into a ball on the passenger side and started rocking and chanting, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Mike looked at me with the most confused look I've ever seen in my life. And he says, baby, you have nothing to be sorry about. And I started sobbing. If he would have told me I was clumsy, if he would have told me I effed up his truck, if he would have called me the B word, any of these things, I could have handled that because that's what I was used to from my father, from my ex-husband. That's just what I was used to. I was not used to be treated with respect and kindness. And when Mike was just so kind to me and I started sobbing, that's when it dawned on me, mental abuse does exist. And I was so far into the forest, I could not see the tree. Yeah. Mike sat in that wet, sticky seat for 3 hours while I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, just hysterically. That's why I married him, right? Good guy. He really helped me a lot with my healing because he could see that, I would not make decisions for myself. With my ex-husband, I would literally have to call him up and say, hey, Earl, should I call in sick to work today? So I remember I called up Mike one time. Mike, I don't feel good. Should I call in sick to work? And Mike's like, what in the hell are you asking me for? You know how you feel. I don't. But he really encouraged me to start making decisions for myself. And that's one thing I see so many women that have experienced trauma, especially, deep trauma. Now, I do want to say, people hear my story and they start rating my trauma as a 10 or a 10 plus. Mm-hmm. They just do. But our bodies do not rate trauma. Our brains try to rate it. And one single sentence that somebody says can be just as traumatizing and have the same effects for the rest of your life.
Yep.
For instance, I've told you so much about, about the sexual abuse, of physical abuse. In writing my book, it dawned on me the thing that I didn't even realize that I had was survivor's guilt from watching my brother get the crap beat out of him constantly. We would do something, my brother would get in trouble and I wouldn't. And so I always had this guilt, the survivor's guilt, like, why is he getting beat, and all these horrible things my father did to him and I watched was really, truly, I think, more harm to me more than the actual sexual abuse. People always think sexual abuse is the worst. But, you go through it, you learn how to disassociate, to get away from it. But what proves with you is the mental abuse part of the sexual abuse. Because the actual act, or even the physical abuse, the bruises go away, everything goes away, but it's that mental abuse that stays with you forever. And that's the trauma. And that's what your body's reacting to. That's how you get the limiting beliefs. That's how you start shrinking and feeling like you're unworthy, or that you're not smart, or you can't do something. For instance, and I will explain the story, why it's so important, like with this trauma thing. Just before I got married to Earl, I wrote a poem that I was going to read to him at my wedding. I was 18 years old. My father said, "Oh my God, Cindy, you should not read that poem. If you read that poem, you're going to be a laughingstock. And matter of fact, you should never share your writing with anyone because you will be a laughingstock." He said that to me one time. And despite the fact that in my life, I had so much positive feedback about my writing from my mother, from teachers. One of my teachers sent something I wrote to a publisher who wrote me this letter telling me that what a good writer I was, how creative I was, and that I would reach success at an early age if I didn't get discouraged. But when my father told me I would be a laughingstock, that was it. When I left my first husband after 20 years, I threw away 5 novels that I wrote that nobody never read, because I was terrified to let anybody read my writing. Naturally, I've gotten over that and had to let go of that, but that was like this really deep traumatic event that really affected my whole life. Who knows where I could have been had I actually tried to publish those books that I wrote, or did something different, because I've always enjoyed writing. I've had a client who she had a teacher tell her she wasn't good enough to be in the spelling bee. So that lessened her whole self-esteem, and she always felt like she wasn't quite good enough, that she had to work harder because she wasn't good enough. I have had another client who was from another country and sent to the States for school because she was so smart and so gifted, and they were having this contest about poem writing. She wrote a poem and the teacher said, "You didn't write this. Nobody from your country could write a poem this good. So you must have copied it from somebody." And again, that statement devastated her. There's so many one little statements that can devastate somebody forever. And also, what we see as normal isn't necessarily normal. My ex-husband and I, we fought, yelled all the time. There was some minor physical abuse spread throughout, but my kids were not used to seeing me get hit, right? They weren't used to seeing people fighting physically with each other. But they were used to the yelling. When Earl's brother and his wife would beat the holy crap out of each other, they were both guilty, right? I mean, they would just domestic violence all the way, beat the crap out of each other. So through a series of events, I typically wouldn't let them watch my kids, because who knows whenever a fight would break out. But through a series of events, they had my kids. So my kids were 4 and 5. Their kids were 2 and 3. So you had 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. My kids remember this to this day, and they're in their 40s, that their aunt and uncle started fighting. They were watching cartoons, and their cousins were sitting there laughing, acting like nothing was happening as their parents were beating the crap out of each other. My kids were literally, they're like that they hugged each other, was holding on to each other, terrified out of their mind, because what's going on? These 2 adults are beating each other up. But I like that story because it shows you that you're just used to your life. I
Yeah.
didn't realize as I was growing up that I lived in this horribly dysfunctional family. I honestly thought it was normal, that it happened to everybody, but nobody
Mm,
talked about it.
mm,
So, whenever my boss, again, going back to, I call her my first coach mentor, told me my life was my choice, what I started realizing was that I could not change the past, but I could rewrite the way I thought about it. And
yeah.
that's so huge in healing. You have to rewrite your past to where you're thinking about it differently. And it's not a one and done thing. Different things will come out, at different times. As I said, I had my, first of all, whenever I spilled the soda, that was a huge awakening for me. Another one I had was I was having a lot of problems with one of my bosses, and I filed a stress lawsuit, or a stress workers' comp suit. And it was also, there's also a physical part of it. But this guy, he actually threw a case and it hit me. He threw like a case, a client case folder, and it hit
Mm,
me. Um, so there's just a lot there. But I thought when I went to, they made me go see a psychiatrist. And I thought, okay, hey, I've been through therapy before and different stuff. And I'm thinking, if I tell the psychiatrist everything I've overcame, he's going to see that all my stress is from work. It has nothing to do, I was happy in my marriage with Mike and everything else. It just had to do with that. But he came back with all my stress was because of my past. And he said
wow.
that when I would talk about my past, I would have a nervous laugh. I was very angry about this. And then a couple years later, I started working. I became a life coach and I was a divorce coach, but I started working with my own coach. And that was Mary Allen. She's known as America's Inner Peace Coach, and it's lifecoachmary.com. And she told me, she goes, Cindy, do you realize every time you talk about your past, you have a nervous laugh? And I didn't realize that. So, what I came to realize, when you can talk about things that happened in your past without feeling the trauma, without a
Mhm.
nervous laugh, that's really whenever that part of the trauma has been healed. One thing that my father told me, this is horrible, but it's something that I held on to for a very long time, was when I was 7 years old, was the first time that a family friend did anything to me. And he actually made me have oral sex with him. And he told me if my mother found out that my mother would be disappointed in me and she wouldn't love me anymore. So, my mother was my life already by this point. My dad was already messing with me. So, I was confused. I was a confused little girl. Like, what do I do? So
Mm,
I felt safe for some reason to tell my father what this gentleman did to me. He wasn't a gentleman, what this man did to me. And so when I told my father what this man did, my father's response was, did you enjoy it? And to think that a father would say that to a 7-year-old girl
mm,
being molested by somebody else is really, it really hit me. And it taught me at that time that I was just an object for men, that I had to do anything and everything that men wanted me to do. I mean, that was what I brought in as being 7 years old, thinking it didn't matter if I enjoyed it or not. I was supposed to like it. I mean, my father asked me if I enjoyed it. So what was wrong with me that I didn't like it? So it
mm,
really put so many confusing thoughts into my head. And what was interesting, Mary did work on me with this, where I could talk about this without choking up and without laughing and everything else. But as the years passed, there was still this part of me that always felt unworthy. I had a successful business already. I had done so much healing. I lived in California in a very small town of 25,000 people, and we were 90 miles from any place else. We lived 120 miles from Los Angeles. On July 4th of 2019, we had a 6.4 earthquake, which is a large earthquake. I was raised in Southern California. I was used to earthquakes. I was in the shower during the 6.4 and I just sat down and waited it out. It was like the third or fourth over 6 earthquake that I had ever been in. So it was just what I had learned to do as a child. Hey, just wait these things out. And then during this earthquake, I always had my mother and father's picture on my fireplace. Not, they weren't together, they were separate, but I always had them there because I was still buying into the lie. My dad was good. He had good qualities. He was a good person. He was just a little screwed up, right? I'm still buying into this lie. And so his picture fell off the fireplace. And as I picked it up, I sort of half joked to my husband, maybe the universe is telling me it's time to retire my dad. So Mike and I laughed, and I put it back on the fireplace because that's where it went. So the next day, July 5th, we had a 7.1 earthquake. I can tell you I was 3 miles from the epicenter. That was the scariest thing I've ever gone through in my life. The news said that our 7.1 earthquake set off as much energy as 50 Hiroshima bombs.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is. And so, and I went running outside during this earthquake and like sat down on the ground, and it's undescribable, the feeling of all of this energy from the ground moving, going through me. It was just crazy. What was even crazier to me is where the epicenter was, the road actually divided. And I was like, wow, I thought that only happened in movies. Because it was a really horrific experience. We had a lot of damage to our house and different stuff. So we decided that we would go to Las Vegas and stay with my daughter for a few days to decompress. My daughter has a friend that's also a life coach. And he tells me, he's like, Cindy, I told him about the picture with my dad's picture falling on the 6.4 earthquake. He goes, Cindy, I want you to close your eyes. Picture your dad standing right smack in front of you. And whenever you have a really good picture of him, let me know. And I go, okay, I've got it. He says, how do you feel? And I said, disgust. He goes, so how's that working for you? Walking around with a picture in your living room that disgusts you. Good point, right? And when I came home, when we got home, because I hadn't been in the house after the earthquake. Mike was in there a few times, but it was crazy. Like everything, fell over. It took us months to get it all cleaned up and fixed. I was really sad because we were just about ready to try to sell it. And then we had the earthquake. We had to wait for another year and a half to sell it. But whenever I got home, the only picture in my entire house that fell and broke was my father's picture. And I remember thinking, God, universe, you didn't have to send me a 7.1 earthquake to teach me a lesson. But I had my dad's picture in like some collages and stuff. So I took out his pictures everywhere and just tore them up. And then I started seeing this therapist, and he did EMF, I think it's EMFD, eye movement desensitization.
Yeah.
But what came with that, whenever I was there, the memory that always stuck out at me was whenever I told my father what the man did to me and him asking me if I enjoyed it. And my dad's picture like being demolished during the earthquake. But by the end of this session, I was like screaming, I am worthy. I am worthy. I am worthy. And so I said, sometimes things happen. I always think, hey, I'm healed. And then something like that happens. I go, that's interesting. Just like when I wrote the book and I figured out that I had some survivor's guilt going on. But it's know that nothing's going to pop into your mind until you are ready to face it. And, healing is not a one-time only. It's a lifelong journey. In my book, I take you, it starts the week my mother died, because that was by far the worst week of my life. And then it takes you back to the past, and I show all the abuse, but also like how I was blinded to it. Whenever I was in my early 20s, I was like, hey, it didn't matter. I was free. I was away from my father, right? And how my past came back to haunt me. And then it goes back to the week my mother died, because that's really when my healing started. I could not have healed had she never died. So once I start sharing my healing processes, I added in there keys to worthiness. So many people are not successful in their coaching business or their online business or at their jobs or in their marriage or anything, because they haven't healed from so many different things. It could be one sentence. We've all had traumas, and you can't rate them. So what I started doing was saying keys to worthiness. What a lot of the trauma does to us is makes us feel unworthy. And so I show you exact exercises throughout the book that you can do to help you heal yourself. And it's not meant to be, disclaimer, it's not meant to be mental health advice. I always suggest, you know yourself and know this is what helped me. It may or it may not help you, but there are ideas that you can try depending upon where you are in your own healing process. And always, if you feel out of control, you want to go to a hospital or to a mental health professional, because whenever you've experienced a lot of major trauma, you really need that professional mental health to get you through certain things.
Looking back now, knowing what you know now, what would you say to your younger self?
How young?
You'd say what?
I said, how young? You said my younger
how
self.
young? Well, pick it. What?
I would say as a child, I would probably say, that you're stronger than you think, and that one day you're going to use all of this to help other people for the good of people. I would say in my early, in my 20s, I would, again say that we can't ignore our past. We have to face it. I don't care what's happened, because if you have anything in your past and you don't face it and you don't let go of it, it affects you one way or another. It affects you in your relationships. It affects you with your health. It affects you somehow. So many people, especially in their younger 20s, but I've known people, my ex-husband never healed from the abuse he endured, never. And that's because he always wanted to act like it didn't matter, and a lot of people think that your abuse doesn't matter, or you think you can put it in the closet or in a corner, and you can't. You have to release it. And I really believe that the only way to release it is by journaling and or talking about it, to really face it. And then once you really face what's happened, then you can rewrite it. You can decide to look at it a different way. And it's like with everything that's happening with my father, with the other men, with my ex-husband, I can look at what they did in a different way and not make it personal. It was never about me. It was always about them. Whatever happened to my father, I have no idea. To make him such a sick, deranged man, I have no idea. I'm very grateful that I had so much of my mother's love, that I was actually able to heal from the abuse, whereas none of my siblings were. And it's like, I don't think it's because I'm any different. I think it's because I wanted to get better. I had such a strong desire to be somebody, to help other people. When I first started thinking about writing the book, I could never write it without my sister's approval or blessing, because her story is my story, right? They're so similar. And she was like, why do you want to write it? I don't understand. Why do you want to tell everybody what happened to us? And I'm like, because I think it can help people. So I always came. And so whenever I got her blessing, I wrote the book. After I wrote my book, my sister-in-law, who also I know was abused, she told me, you're stupid for writing that book. I would never share my story publicly. But, it takes people like me that's willing to share what's happened in order to help other people heal. Had I not had other people that experienced similar things to me share their stories with me, I never would have been able to heal. And I think that's, just what I would have always told my younger self, is that everything you're going through, you can help other people.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it. One thing I was thinking before we close was that I also worked in social services as well. And I find it really bizarre that, for me personally, even though I work with other families who were experiencing trauma, all these conversations about abuse and neglect and normal stuff in social services.
Right.
But it took me a very long time for me to realize how horrendous my life had been.
Right.
Even though I was
Mm-hmm.
confronted by it every day, I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't see how bad my situation was until actually I was in my late 40s, a
Yeah.
lot later.
From my experience, what I really think, so many people in their 20s think their past doesn't matter. So they're sort of hiding behind it. And then you get into your 30s, and for some reason, it starts facing you. And it really starts affecting you in different ways. I could see the change even in my ex-husband. But my ex-husband he was an adult child of an alcoholic. He was your textbook adult child of an alcoholic. And, it was sweep everything under the rug, act like it doesn't exist. However, he was my perfect partner because even though, one thing my current husband could never understand is how Earl led my father around my daughter. Well, I was so close to my mother that my parents were very involved in my life because, my dad came with my mom and I wasn't going to let my mom go. But Earl, because he was an adult child of an alcoholic, was able to just, sweep it under the rug and act like it didn't exist. So that's why I say he was my perfect partner to have children with because of that reason. Because there was no way I was going to disown my mom or tell my mom because I didn't want to kill her. So, it was, because it really played. I heard that without exaggerating. I probably heard if your mom finds out it's going to kill her a minimum of 1,000 times in my life. So whenever you've heard that so many times, you really start believing it.
I believe it.
And so, it's just very interesting. But I really think, like you said, working in social services, you didn't realize. But when you're ready to face it, something happens. And even memories. Now, my father did abuse my daughter. She didn't even remember until like 2015. So she was a lot older when she remembered. I could not. Could not have handled it 20 years ago. I would have went berserk knowing that he did what he did to her before I was healed enough to be able to accept it. Like she said, like, Mom, how come you let me around Grandpa after he did what he did to you? And I go, because I was in denial. That's like it. I was 100% in denial. And I honestly thought that what I was doing was protecting her as well as my mom, but obviously not.
It's the denial, I think, is really interesting. It's baffling, isn't it?
It is.
I find it baffling. I just,
yeah.
It took for me to have a breakdown for me to finally start to understand what had been going on. And that's only because I did a really silly thing, which was I was brought up in the care system. And then because I was subconsciously looking for answers to questions, I started working in social services and worked in social services for 20 years. Unconsciously looking for answers to questions that I was never going to find, and eventually broke down. It's just bizarre.
Yeah, and it's
understandable, but
it's the wondering, why it happened. Why is always it's a killer question. Why? It really is. Whenever you're talking about why did this person abuse me? Why did this person say that? Even like, why wasn't I smart enough to realize what was going on? Why wasn't I smart enough to protect my daughter, right? Really, I did not struggle with that. Amy and I had a very long conversation, and I'm very blessed that I have such a great understanding daughter, that she holds nothing against me. But it's, and I always tell people, when you read my book, anything about Amy is Amy approved because she was one of my editors.
Nice.
But it, it's just really interesting, those questions, like why? And it's just like asking a 2-year-old, why did you get a cookie? Right? It's like, well, because I wanted it. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time for whatever reason. And we can never, when we think of all these crazy things, we can't explain why too. But something gets into our head and we believe it, and we'll fight for it tooth and nail, or we'll again try to figure out like why. But with limiting beliefs, how they get into our head. And they don't have to like make a lot of sense to anybody else or why you believe what you believe. But whenever I turned 48, I honestly thought my nephew was 8 years younger than me. Thought my sister was 16 when he was born. So I turned 48 in June. I see Marty in July. His birthday's in August. And I'm like, Marty, you can be the big 40 next month. He goes, no, Aunt Cindy, I'm going to be 39. Marty, don't lie to me. You're trying to pull the wool over my eyes. I fought with him literally for an hour about how old he was. His kids are telling me, honest, Aunt Cindy, he's going to be 39. Mike's like, Cindy, don't you think Marty knows how old he is? I go, nope, he's just trying to fool me, right? And I'm like fighting tooth and nail. Finally, Marty gets this bright idea, pulls out his driver's license and says, Aunt Cindy, look at the year I was born. You tell me how old I am. And I was like, holy crap, you're going to be 39. But we believe things like that. And that's like, even like why somebody, you could like from your past, you could think, I was a bad girl. That's why he did that to me. Right. And so it makes no sense. And trying to figure out why we believed something is like, once you start asking yourself with any thought, is it true? And whose truth is it? Most of the voices in my head are my father's or Earl's, to tell you. But the ones that screw with me, even like 4 or 5 years ago, I had this thought, I am so bad with money. And then I thought to myself, whose voice is that? It's Earl's voice. He's the only person in my entire life that ever told me I was bad with money. Everybody else tells me I was good with money. So why am I letting Earl's opinion, affect me? And we do this with any type of abuse. We start these beliefs. So you were searching for answers and what happened to you, and if it was your fault or if it was somebody else's fault, or why did these people do these horrible things? Yeah, which is really normal, but we can never find the answers until we look into ourselves. And so it's an inside out job.
It's absolutely. It's why I called this event "Take a Stand," because it's really about taking a stand for yourself.
Right.
It's not necessarily fighting all the battles externally, but going inward and finding that place of a peace that we all want. Right. Cindy, thank you very, very much.
Real quick, just want to add, whenever you look into yourself, it's loving yourself. It's like anybody that's listening to this, look in the mirror every day and look at your pupils and say, I love you, Cindy, whatever your name is. I love you. And just do this, because we start from the abuse that we've endured. We start feeling that we're unlovable and we're not worthy of love. We're not worthy of success. We're not everything. And it all starts with that self-love, that self-compassion, and know that anything anybody ever said to you or did to you is on them. It's not on you. You didn't do anything wrong. You're absolutely perfect the way you are. And I always tell people, you look at a baby, you look at a newborn baby. We don't get mad at babies for crying or for voicing their opinion, but yet we don't feel that we're worthy to voice our opinion. So I would love for you to start just telling, look at yourself in the mirror, tell yourself you love you, learn to love yourself, and tell yourself you are worthy. I think those are the best 2 affirmations. I love myself and I am worthy, because once you start, those get in there, then you can start facing other things and realize, because you are worthy and you are lovable and you are beautiful. And, everything that happened to you was not your fault, but you are here for greater and better things when you learn to let go of your past.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you very much for your time.
You have a great day.
You too.
It's been a pleasure having you. We'll talk to you later.